Let's go ahead and get started. So we're going to be learning about functions and objects today. You guys probably have a bit of a opening to functions already based on things like pre-work or some of the exercises you've done in class already. And then objects maybe a little bit less so. So functions are essentially a means through which we can create or run some sort of action in our JavaScript files, right? Objects are similar to arrays, which I believe you guys learned about in intro. Is that right? Yeah. So objects are similar to arrays in that they're basically a list of information within a given variable. You'll see they're a little bit different than arrays. So arrays we kind of consider an ordered list. So if you guys remember to call some information out of an array, you would say like array name and then in bracket 0 or bracket 1, something like that, to call a part of an array from that given sequence. So objects are a little bit different, and we'll get into that a little bit later. So to start out, we're going to go through functions. So we're going to talk about what a function is, what the structure is, and what they're used for. So we're going to get into a little bit of the definition of it, and then go through some exercises there. And then for objects, we're going to do a little bit more of kind of a you-do heavy for objects. So we were kind of looking at this, and there's a lot of opportunity for me to just sort of sit up here and copy and paste things into the console. So we're going to let you guys actually go and run with objects and really explore how to play around with them and make use of an object. So before we get started, let's get into just some framing here. So what have you guys learned so far in JavaScript? So data types. Does anybody remember? Can anybody name me an example of a data type? Yeah.
Numbers.
Yeah. How about anyone else? Yeah, Matthew.
Booleans.
Booleans. Yep. Ryan, do you have one? Did you just steal one? Strings.
Floats, characters.
Yep. Anyone? One more? We don't need to name them all. Anything else? All right, cool. Let's think about it. So then, how about conditionals? Does anybody know? Can anybody just give me an example of what a conditional is? Yeah.
Like an if statement.
Yeah, exactly. Like an if-then. Exactly. And lastly, data collections. I already mentioned kind of the data collection that you guys have learned so far, but can anybody reiterate that? Yeah. Yep. Exactly. So data collections, there are different types. So both arrays and objects are what we call complex data types, which lead into what are called data collections. But we'll get into objects in a little bit. So to go into functions, that question's a little bit small down there. So can anyone just tell me at a high level, what is a function? Yeah.
Reusable block of code.
Yeah, exactly. Yep. What would be a good use for this?
So I didn't hear what you said.
She said a reusable block of code. Yeah. Would be like a good use case for reusing code.
If you find yourself using the same chunk of question over and over again, like in the choose your own adventure, you ask the same thing over and over again, just put it in a function and call it each time.
Yeah, exactly. So keeping your code dry, right? Yeah, exactly. You guys all know what dry means. We talked about that. All right, cool. So do not repeat yourself. What else? Any other ideas? That's pretty much it. So as it says here, a function is a block of code that takes an input and processes that input and produces an output. So the way that we think about it, some people who are higher up than me like Quiznos. I like Potbelly more, but similar circumstance. So the idea is they put together a sandwich for you, right? Then they run it through that big toaster oven, and then it outputs a completed sandwich. So the idea is you have an input, run it through your toaster, and then you have an output, which is a delicious sandwich. Any questions on that so far? No? All right. So back to what we've looked at so far. I guess you already mentioned the choose your own adventure. Where else have you guys seen functions in our class already? Yeah.
Rock, paper, scissors.
Yeah, so the pre-work, exactly. What kind of functions did you run there? Or like what's an example of a function you ran there?
Quit layer.
Yeah.
And then there was the computer random generated.
Yeah, so basically the entire script was a collection of different functions, right?
Right.
All right, cool, exactly. So I guess we kind of already got into this, but why do we use functions? So if you wanted to produce the product of two numbers, how do you do that with a function? So this is something that you would do so that you don't have to continuously write in your code 2 plus 2 or 1 plus 1, right? You can use a reusable block where you just input those numbers and it returns the value of that product. So as we mentioned before, the benefits of functions, reusability, dryness, and then the last one is naming convention. So naming convention is a really big thing, right? So it allows you to give others or even yourself when you're looking at a large chunk of code, a large script, you can see sort of the name of a function will tell you what that function does. You don't just want to have something that says math and then it just does addition, right? You would want to be a little bit more specific and call that addition. So let's just go into what the structure of a function looks like. So what is the first thing that we need out of a function? And I can just go ahead and write it on the board. So if you were to actually write code that is a function, what's the first thing you would need? Yeah.
Function.
Yeah, for sure. Okay. What would come next? Yeah.
Anything that you create, any name, and then parentheses.
Yeah. Yep. So let's call it function multiply, and then parentheses, right? And then what would be the last step, sort of the main structure of a function? Sorry?
The actual operation.
Can you say that again?
The actual thing that it does, the operation.
So that would be we're gonna get to that. So even just to finish up the main skeleton, yeah.
Putting the parameters inside of parentheses.
We'll get to that. One more thing, sorry. I guess this isn't the most clear thing. Yeah. Yeah, so the curly braces. So this is just that's not a very good curly brace, but it's fine. Let's just assume. I'm not an artist, so it's fine. I think we've all realized that already. Yeah, so this is literally your skeleton of the function, alright? So then the next step would be to add in the parameters, right, or the arguments. So I guess to start out, does a function always have to have parameters or arguments? No. Right, cool. So, but we could add them here. So this would be arguments, right? And then lastly would be what we add in here. So that's what I think Mohammed, you said, right? So what we add in here. So this would be we added in arguments, I guess I didn't show it on the code. So we had num1, num2. We can then add in a math function here. So we can say return num1 times num2. So that'll allow us to pass in these two numbers, and the output will be the mathematical equation of num1 times num2, or the result of num1 times num2. Yeah.
Is return always going to be there, and if not,
Mhm.
when do you use it, when do you not?
It's a great question. We'll get into that in a little bit. Short answer, it does not always need to be there. So, on that note, does a function need an input, output, and or side effect? So, to talk about side effects really quick, so our output would be this return, right? What we're returning here is our output. Once you return something, that function essentially is done. The return is sort of the final step of the function. Before that, you can have what we call side effects. So side effects are essentially something that affects a different part of your script or of your code, right? Or of the browser. So one of the most basic side effects that you can do is a console log. So if you have console log in here, so if you do console log num1, so what that'll do is that'll print that first number into your console, right? You guys have all used console log, right? Yeah, so you're doing it, I think, for the choose your own adventure stuff. So this will console log it. This is what we call a side effect. So that can happen, and that is not an actual output. That is just something that changes another aspect of your code or another aspect of the browser. It is not an implicit return. So what a return does is it'll provide something that you can then use in another chunk of code. So let's take a look real quick. So this is my function multiply, right? So I'm creating this function, and if I run multiply 2 and 4, you'll see here we get 8 here and 8 here as well. So the console log is actually this first 8. So that's just printing it. The return is this 8 here. So what that's saying is if we want to use this function in another function, let's say, and we want to use the value that comes out of this, we would use the second 8, the returned value. That's the value that we can actually implement again in our code. What we console log, the side effect, is something that's literally just happening on the side. It's not something that we can then reuse in another chunk of code. Does that make sense, people? That's a pretty, yeah, sure, Rob.
So why have it on there?
So console logs are really good to use for something like troubleshooting or like debugging your code, right? So it's something where if your function's not working or it's not returning what you want it to actually return, you can use console log that'll actually show, it'll print it out on the console. So returning will usually be something that ends up being printed out on your browser, let's say, or something like that. Whereas a console log will always be here on the side that you can then check to see what's actually what is happening in your function. Yeah, Matt.
I have another example of a side effect. If I want to save something to the database, the saving it and changing the database is the side effect. The return is probably the true or false. Did it save or didn't it save? That's another way to look at something like a side effect that you want to have happen, that you plan to have happen.
Yeah, thank you. So then when we have functions, there are kind of two ways we can use a function. We can call our function or we can reference our function. So calling our function is what we just did. So it's running this multiply 2 and 4. So that is actually using the input and running that function. Referencing the function is essentially like referencing a variable. So let's just take a look here. What do you guys think would happen if I just type out multiply without the parentheses or anything? Nothing? Close. So there won't be a return. But what it'll give us is it'll give us the actual function. It'll tell us what is in that function. Can anyone think of why you might want to have something like this? Yeah.
If the argument for a function is another function?
Yes, exactly. So if you're passing a function into another function and you don't want the function that you've passed in to be called right away, right? Yeah, that's exactly right. So that would be if, let's say, you have one function that returns a value that you then need to add into as an argument for another function. You could pass one into the other, and then you can run it at another time. Yeah.
So I'm curious as to why it printed console log, even though it's not recognized as a part of code, rather just a side effect.
Sorry, can you repeat that?
So I see when you reference the function, that console log came in as part of the chunk of code.
Yeah.
Curious as to if it just prints everything.
Yep.
Yeah.
Gotcha. So this is literally going to write out exactly what the code is. So this will be, if you have this in a script file, if you run this multiply here, it will show you exactly what is in that block of code in your script file. So it's telling you everything that will happen, not just what will be returned, but it'll tell you every step of the process of that function. Yeah. Any other questions? Yeah.
Assuming you're using num1 and num2, does JavaScript automatically recognize that? As you need to input one number here and one number there?
Yeah. So basically, this comma is the separator between those two numbers. So you could call it whatever you want. So we could say, we could call it function, we could create this, we could create this function here and say instead of num1, num2, we could call this pizza and bagels. And that'll still work. So now we can still do multiply, if you spell it right, multiply 2 and 4.
Don't you have to correct your return statement?
Oh, yep. Thank you. Yeah. Good call. That's going to be a pain. All right, so let's do pizza and pizza. Bagels and bagels. All right, so now let's try that again. So now it'll give us the same output. Thank you. Any other questions there? You good? Yep.
Sometimes when it's like, I thought like if you don't like create a variables, then it doesn't
So you're saying like the
Say,
arguments that you're
yeah,
putting in here?
They are, this is this, you don't put meanings and stuff, because sometimes when you write a code and it just doesn't recognize that you're, for example, like you type delay in it, like delay is undefined as a result.
So you're saying like if you sometimes put
You
in,
don't have to define number one or number two.
oh, so you're saying like just have a blank empty
Yeah.
string here? You can do that sometimes. It depends on what kind of function you're running. So this is a function that would take inputs. Some of them would just produce like a side effect, let's say. So you could just run a function that says, that would be like function multiply equals, and then you can literally just have a console log that prints out a string.
I think he's asking why pizza and bagels.
Yeah, why they
doesn't-
accept it rather than like, they can define what it means.
So why we can pass in anything
Yeah.
there. So these are just, these are literally just placeholders essentially. So it's not, those are not actual, they could be variable names if you have variables that are set up already. But this is just asking, this is just telling it there will be 2 arguments passed in at some point. So as long as you pass in 2 arguments, the function will recognize those 2 arguments as pizza and bagels. Yeah.
I think what he was saying is the reason why it automatically assumes the first variable that you put in is pizza, the second one is bagels. That's predefined when you put it in the function, right? When you put it under multiply and then say pizza comma bagels,
Yeah.
it knows whatever you enter after you call that function, the first element that you put in is in replacement of pizza, the other one is in replacement.
Yeah, exactly. So the first number here will be represented by pizza, just because that's just how our JavaScript functions understand the concept. Yeah, that's exactly right. Does that answer your question, kind of?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. All right. So now we're going to get in, this part's a little bit confusing, but we're going to get into declarations and expressions. So there are 2 ways to define, or as we call it, declare a function, right? So the first is, as we have up on the board already. So we have this function multiply equals num1 comma or function multiply in parentheses num1 num2, right? If we ran this, we would get the output that we've already been doing here, okay? What do people think would happen if we created this? Var multiply equals function num1 num2. Would this provide the same result if we then ran multiply of 2 and 4?
Yes.
Yeah, let's see it. Thank you. So let's go ahead and run it. So multiply 2 and 4. Yeah, so this time I just put a return. There's no console log, but it's the exact same thing. So what is the difference between these 2? Does anyone notice kind of a difference just in the code? Yeah.
So now that you create the variable multiply, whenever you input that variable, it will pull that entire function and run that code. Right?
Sort of. So we could actually run it the original way and then call that multiply function at any point in time. What about just literally just looking at these 2 pieces of code? What do you see? What are the differences here? Yeah.
Well, the first one, you're like declaring a function, and you have this function is called multiply. And on the second one, you're setting a variable called multiply that contains a function inside.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. So basically, you're saving it to a variable, right? That's exactly right. So they do pretty much the same thing. The only difference is that they lead to what we call, or one leads to what we call hoisting. So declarations happen before any other code occurs, whereas expressions happen where they are in the code. So we'll get into an exact example of that. But what I mean by that is a declaration is hoisted essentially to the top of your JavaScript file. So no matter where you put it, JavaScript, when you run a JavaScript file, it will look through the file and see if there are any functions that are set up like the first one. And it will define that variable, or define that function, right away. This, however, will happen only where it is in the script file. So let's get into an example here. So what do you think would happen if we run this code? I'm going to clear this. So if we run this chunk of code, so we're calling the multiply, I'm going to have to refresh that. If we call the multiply function here, right? we have not defined multiply before, so I just refreshed the page. So if we call multiply 3, 5 here, what do we think is going to happen? Yeah.
You're gonna get some type of error.
Yeah, exactly. So we're going to get a type error. So it doesn't actually know that multiply exists, right? However, this sort of answers this already with the however, but what do we think happens here? So I'm doing the exact same thing, right? I'm running this code. I'm running this function first. What do we think is going to happen now?
You're gonna get the output.
Yeah, exactly. So now it's going to give me the output. The reason for that is that this way of writing code hoists above the actual call of that function. So on that note, we're going to kind of run through another example really quick. So similarly, if we run this express function, what do we think is going to happen here? So if we're calling express here and then declaring or expressing the express variable here, what do we think is going to happen? Exactly. So we're going to get another error. Do we think that this var express has actually been run now? If I type in express here and reference it, will the script have run enough to actually hit that variable? Think so? Some no's, some yeses. So it's actually still going to be undefined. So that function will not have actually been created yet. So now, what if we run all of this? So if we set, so if we're now running the var express here, but we're calling this declare and express function right here, and then setting the declare function below it, what do we think the output's going to look like here? Sorry?
Should still show an error, right? Since you're calling the declare function after.
Do you think so?
Or you're
Yeah,
calling
thoughts?
it first before you-
Think it'll work? Can I get a show of hands for who thinks it'll work? Uh-oh.
Unless I'm wrong.
Sorry, that's not what I meant to happen. I apologize. All right, fair enough. So it will run both of these. So the reason for that, to go back, is that this second one is, again, not setting a variable. It's just it's setting this function up, which then gets hoisted above everything. So this declare will be hoisted at the top of our script before even this var express. And then when we call declare, you'll see declaration called. And then when we call express, this has now happened already still, and we get our expression called. Does that make sense, everyone? So, yeah.
So, is there any benefit to using an expression versus a declaration?
That's a great question, and I was going to ask you guys the same question right now. So if you'd like, you're welcome to answer that now. Or if you don't like, I can open up to the class. So basically, can you think of a potential pitfall or benefits to hoisting or not hoisting? So basically, setting your function up like this with the var first, so saving it to a variable, or setting it like this, where you have the function immediately. Can someone think of a pitfall to doing it like this? Yeah.
Wouldn't it depend if you're like working collaboratively, so you're able to explain it to other people so they understand what you're trying to do?
So, in what
Like-
sense?
Like if you're to use a variable express function, it'd be better to use if you're working with a lot of people compared to using a function because you already understand what's supposed to be going on.
Well, so it has the same name, right? It still has the proper naming convention. So one's called declare, one's called express. So the names are pretty similar. But do you mean like in terms of code readability?
Yes. Because like it's the same. Because like for me, it seems easier to read the first line than it does the second line.
Oh, that's fair. Yeah, I can see that. So yeah, readability is fair. So it just looks, you're actually setting a variable here, and so people can kind of scroll through and understand what you're doing. That's fair. I like that. Any other thoughts? Yeah.
If you're working on some unruly huge file
Mhm.
with tons of lines of code, and you've declared all your functions at the top, and then you try to recall something later, you may not have any idea what that's doing.
Yeah.
So like locality of
Yeah, that's a good one. So kind of like understanding where things are in your code and sort of making it more organized. Yeah, that's totally fair. Matt, one of the Matts.
The first thing I hear with that is you've got this big, massive, unruly code, and that means I don't want to use some other technique to kind of hide that. I want to correct that problem first, but yeah. interesting because somebody else said they like using the variable because that feels more comfortable to them. And to me, that kind of confuses me because it's a variable. No, wait, it's a function. Wait, it's a function that holds a variable? No, wait, what is this thing? And I just want it to be a function. But that's why Baskin Robbins has 31 flavors, right? Each place is a little bit different. And it's funny how his strength was also my weakness.
Mhm.
That's the way it'll be sometimes too.
Yeah, exactly. So yeah, go ahead.
Oh, sorry.
No,
I was
go
gonna
for it.
add, it seems that the expression variables is a better place to start because you can put more under it and like have it have more like a top-down logical way of approaching.
So by setting it as a variable first.
Yes.
Yeah, so I mean, there's really no right or wrong answer to this. So you can do it both ways, honestly. The biggest thing is it's an idea of readability, as we've been talking about before. So if you kind of set all these functions at the bottom of your script or something like that, and then you have all these function calls at the top, someone who's reading through your file, or even if you read through your file, you're not going to know what those functions do yet, because they're all the way at the bottom, and you have to scroll down to the bottom. If you have a 300-line script file, that's going to be a pain. If you set these variables close to where you're calling them, then you get to kind of understand, all right, I'm calling this express function on line 20, and I see that this variable has been set on line 15. Yeah.
I don't see what the real big difference is because I mean the functions don't really do anything unless you pass them an argument in the first place. So whether or not, and they're all going to be at the top. Do people mostly declare all their variables and their functions before the main code starts?
No. So there isn't a difference in how they operate necessarily when you actually pass arguments in. So passing an argument into this, they're going to produce the same output every time. Well, they're going to produce the same output if you have it set properly. However, so it's not that they're setting their functions at the top of the script file. It's more just an opportunity to organize your code a little bit better. So you can do it however you want. It's kind of up to you. The issue is that if you're hoisting a lot of functions, so if you have a really, really long script file, let's say, right? And at the top of your script file, you're calling 7 different functions, and none of them are defined anywhere in that area. The idea is that it's just hard for someone to go back and look at that and say, I understand what these functions are doing. Yeah.
But in that case, couldn't you just declare a function above where you're going to use it, or below where you're going to use it, like around where you're going to use it?
Yeah, absolutely, for sure.
Offsets the.
Yeah, and that's why I'm saying there's no right or wrong answer out of this, and there's no right one to use this. Like, we're teaching you both of these for a reason, and that's that you can use them both, right? It's more just to get you guys thinking about code readability. So you don't want to have all of your functions set up at the bottom of your script, even though you can then hoist them up to the top. Yeah.
I was just going to say, it seems like the major advantage to doing the variable thing is if you're going to be using a lot of functions within functions.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a good one. Yep. Yeah, right.
So, for the variable, what was it called? Expression.
Yep.
Way of writing a function.
Mhm.
Would that allow you to create functions at runtime? As opposed to being so if you were making like a Replit thing, like a website like that, you could have the user write their own functions, like you know what I mean?
Sort of.
As it being run, as opposed to being run beforehand.
Sorry, can you repeat that again?
Like you could write expressions on the fly while the code is running.
So if you're saying setting a variable doing that, or doing it with the function, with the
Without
declaration?
the declaration, setting it as a variable.
So if you did it on the fly there, you could set it as a variable, but then you would have to call that function below it. Yeah, you could definitely do that. Yeah. Does anybody else have any questions on that? So yeah, as I was saying, this is a pretty confusing topic because there is not necessarily a right answer here. It's a bit difficult to understand just because you can do it however you want. The idea is really, and everybody has kind of different ideas of what good readable code is, but there are sort of guidelines at least that you would like to follow. And so to kind of go back to this one more time, you can set these functions however you like. But one reason that I like to use sort of this var express at least is you set the function. If you're going to call that function all over your script file, you tend to want that to be declared as a variable ahead of time just so people actually understand what you're getting at. But there are a lot of, I would suggest playing around with it a little bit and seeing what you guys how you prefer it. So on that note, we're going to get into a little exercise here. This is going to be, you guys are just sort of running or looking at this code. Don't actually run the code in your console yet. So you'll see the alert foo at the end. That will give you your answer. So what I would suggest is for each of these 3 questions, take a look. We're going to spend maybe 5 to 10 minutes doing this. Take a look at it. Try to determine what you think the output's going to be or the return value is going to be for each of these. Maybe work with a partner, discuss it with a partner for a few minutes, see what you guys get, and then we'll bring it back to the class if we have time and kind of run through them. So I'm going to put 10 minutes up on the board, and then let me know if you have any questions. Also, we're going to go on a 10-minute break after these 10 minutes, so if you guys finish early, there is a bonus exercise below this if you want to work on that, or you can go on break a few minutes early.
Through these things, right? Yes. What is this output going to be? What am I expecting to see from this? Did I get it? Didn't I get it? Why not?
I know when Nick and I were building this lesson plan, we struggled with the first one for a little while to understand why the return value was as it is. So just taking minutes to think about it, and maybe we can go over it in a few minutes. Yeah, I think you can run through the last 5 minutes of this.
Is it always going to take the last one? It's yeah. So it's going to be the last one. So
this is
yeah, probably.
so actually that's what we should go to.
get to.
So if you
Yeah.
maybe you did.
Go back and forth. Well, see, and the first iteration is the simplest thing you can do, and the simplest thing you can think of is the right function in places. Figure out everything you want to do, and then all of a sudden, oh wait, I've got a name for it, and you're trying that.
There's a return.
Sometimes they're small, so you'll leave them right there.
Yeah, that's a great question. So the idea is
Sometimes
so basically, this one drops to first, and that all goes to the top, and then
yeah, but we can idea like how did that actually work?
so it's all about so basically
Expression.
so it's going to scan here and see right now, essentially look for this order function everywhere. You'll see function, function, function as it goes down. And it's going to take all that and push it up to the front of your file. So first it's going to see this function bar. Then it goes and sees function bar. So that is a section. And then it's returning 8. So it's all that will find what you finally ask for. It's going to think that it's 8. Does that make sense?
But then why would this go above that?
So that's the idea of voicing. So basically, if you set it as a variable, it stays where it is. But if you set it with this function first, JavaScript goes through and pulls all of those functions out. That's just how JavaScript operates. It goes through, so it literally scans the entire file. It looks for everything that starts with order function.
So it's
And then puts
obviously
it in order at the
first
top.
we add
And then it runs it.
So let's say there's another function bar that says return 20. Does it go 20 to 8?
So it would then go, if you had this return bar, or function bar,
So that's once you're outside the
that
function.
here had function bar return 8,
So
and
it
below
does,
that,
because
you
I
have
think
function
actually
bar
if you look,
return 20.
if you have the positive
Then the end
neighbors
result
like a console logs bar, it would actually see
Yeah,
the bar.
exactly.
But when you try to access it, maximize it, you know what it is.
How are people feeling? Do you guys want to go over these questions real quick before we go on break? Yeah? All right, good. Good, good. All right. We're gonna run through them real quick. All right, guys. So this was hard, as I was saying. Hoisting and not hoisting. It's a tough concept. So does anybody want to go through number 1 and try to explain it for me? Appreciate that. Yeah, Matthew.
Alright, so one has two calculations. So it's of course the bar is replaced by the newest iteration of what it is.
Yep.
So therefore it's going to return 8 and not 3 because the last time it is
Yep, that's exactly right. So it will return 8, as you can see. So to kind of just go into that a little bit deeper. So basically the idea is that JavaScript takes this entire, let's call it a script that we've run, right? So it's going to scan through this entire thing first before it actually does anything. It's going to go through this entire thing, and it's going to essentially look for the word function. So we're seeing function bar return 3. So it says, all right, got that in my memory now. Then it keeps going. It skips over this return bar first. Skips over, and then it sees another function. And it says function bar return 8. So then JavaScript thinks, all right, now bar is returning 8. We know that. Then it goes back, and it says we have this function set. What else can I do? And then it sees this return bar. And that's why it's going to return 8. Does that make sense, everyone? Cool. How about number 2? Anybody want to go with that? I'm going to try one other person real quick. See if someone else wants to go. Yeah, Rob.
So in that same process that we did number 1, except that second, so that should display 3 simply because when it says return bar, that second var equals function of the return 8 wasn't declared already.
Mhm.
So it just originates the very first one where it says the return 3.
That's exactly right. Yep. So in this case, we're setting. Whoop. Yeah. All right. So in this case, we're setting these as variables. So JavaScript isn't going through. JavaScript goes through here and it just sees this is a variable. So I can take this and then move on to the next thing. Now we're returning bar. Simple as that. This doesn't happen because we've set the return. We've returned our function, and then it gives us our value of 3. Any questions there? All right. So the last one. Who wants to give this one a try? Yeah.
It doesn't work because you're returning bar before you declared what bar is.
Yep. Exactly right.
Immediately returns bar before you even told it what bar is.
Exactly. So JavaScript goes through this entire thing. It doesn't see any function declarations, right? It just sees the variables. So it comes back, and then it starts running it again, and it runs into this return. So these variables haven't been set yet, and it starts the return, and there's nothing actually set as bar. So it errors out. If, let's say, we change that to did function bar here, that would, yeah, exactly. So that should return 8. I'm glad I actually did that. Any other questions before we go on break real quick? Yeah, Patrick.
So for the third one, it's a type error, so it knows bar is a variable, it just doesn't know that it's a function yet.
So that's a good question. So it thinks it's trying to define what bar is, basically. It's saying it thinks that bar is a function. So you see here it's saying bar is not a function. So putting those 2 parentheses there is telling JavaScript that it is a function, right? But because it's not defined, it's saying you've told me this is a function, but you haven't actually defined it. So so we're telling you that we can't return anything on that. Does that answer that?
Yeah.
Cool. Any other questions? All right, cool. Let's go on a oh, yep, one more. No, it's all right. Yeah.
So why would it think that it's a function?
So it's basically just setting these where are we? Setting the parentheses here. This is essentially telling JavaScript this word is supposed to be a function. Yeah. All right. So, oh yeah, go ahead.
If you declare the function first and then use the expression to kind of make the same function, would it overwrite the previously declared function?
So if you declare it first, so you're saying if you do like function bar equals something,
Yeah.
or function bar and then setting it and then declaring it as a variable. So yeah, so essentially that declaration gets hoisted up, but then if you redefine it as a variable, anything you call below that variable will then run as that variable. If you call it above that variable, it'll run as the declaration. Yeah.
That's real tricky for other developers.
Yep.
Don't do that.
Very much so. All right, let's go on a break since we've been at this for a little while. Let's just say come back at 3:23. Hey, what's up? Sorry? Yeah, what's up?
The reason it does it is because it's the most recent one?
Yeah. So basically the idea is, so JavaScript essentially runs through your script file twice, right? So first things first, when you run this, right, it's going to go through and it's going to scan everything. So it's going to scan for function, right? Anything, if you set anything as like a var, that's not what I want to do. Whatever. So if you set something as a var here, it's not really going to read that in just yet. It's just going to scan through really quick and see where are these functions declared. So as soon as it does that, those all get pushed up. So they get pushed up in order though. So basically this function bar return 3 goes at top, and then this function bar return 8 goes second. Then JavaScript goes through again and says, all right, these have been declared. Yep. So it's going to say, now I think that bar is 8 or returns 8. Now I hit this return bar. That's what I'm going to tell it it is. Yeah. Does that make sense? It's a confusing one. I know. I struggle with that a lot. Yeah. Yeah. For sure. Good question. Ooh, sorry. One sec.
If you're familiar with that.
So this is just that's separate from yes. Anytime you start in this and that's fine. As I was saying, there's no wrong answer or right answer, or it's not like a readability. So in this case, these are all set. These are all set up and only using one, right? So that's fine. Yeah. Cool. Yeah. Oh, so you have to read this each year. So in your index file, you can call that script file, right? So if you open up your index file in Atom, right? So up at the top, so you need to set this up as an actual HTML file, so all this object stuff, right? And then in there, you can call this you would write a script tag that actually contains this file. So that's Yep. So no, so I mean, you can do that. What I would do is in your script, I would say script and then space inside there, do space and then source for src equals, and then in quotes just use script objects. So that's telling it to look in this file and actually use and then do a split.
That's what I'm saying. You need somebody who is different.
Oh, so actually has
I mean, but when I was in
that's not it.
they're not.
Either way. So it gets all that stuff and then that'll all be it should work. Should. Can I see your script file one more time?
Yeah. And she said that though. She said that she passed it out. But I definitely
Yeah.
would have to.
So what you have to do is when you open it up, you open up the browser, you have to open up the console. Basically, that's the one side here.
Did they separate you from the
You do command option J. So you just command option and then J, and then that'll.
So did you start the
Well, I didn't even do last night I did yesterday I did the quiz and I did
Yep. So you have it on bottom. You can change the origin.
well, I was just spending a really long time in the house because I was looking at jobs.
Side.
And then Saturday and Sunday I didn't really
So you would run it, you basically open up the HTML file, but you go into like terminal and you open it in the Hey, I'm sorry, your question.
Oh, just, no, that's okay. I was trying to figure out, I was trying to take the last one to the third one and remove the return bar, state time, here.
Okay.
And then I started thinking, how would we know about the things actually return whatever these variables? So like, if you're looking at it without them.
Yeah, so right now, this isn't gonna, so you won't actually return anything out of this. So the return 3 and the return 8, those will only come if you call bar. So somewhere here, you need to actually call bar and open and close parentheses, right? So if you call food right now, it'll set this variable, but that doesn't, but then that's all it needs.
Now, and when I do call bars, in this scenario,
So if you let's try it out. So why not right below there, or sorry, yep. So if you do return bar, what do you think?
I use Divi.
Try to remove the space between bar. Oh, sorry, yeah. So you actually also have to call food. So right now you're setting food as a variable or as a function here, but it's not being called. So like below that it's say food. So it turns out, why do you think so?
Now, see, and this is what I was trying to get at.
Yep.
So I know, like, when you do functions, the functions automatically move, like, higher up to the top, right? But in this case, is this similar to, like, I guess the way I'm comparing it, like, kind of like this, you know, put things in order.
Yep, exactly. So JavaScript goes from top to bottom. So when you run it, it's going to say, okay, we've set this variable bar to return 3. Then it keeps going and says, oh, actually, we've set it to return 8. I'm going to change my memory to say that it's returning 8. And then you call it. So it's only going to go back to the last thing that it had in memory, and now it's telling it to return 8.
Okay. All right, I get that now.
Cool. Yeah, for sure.
So what does the cutting the it converts your string into
That's really legit. Oh, Belgium, honestly. Definitely would see, this is where I'm sending it. This
You'll be in the LC back in
I flew from Seoul to LA, and I landed before.
You actually flew off.
What you're getting back from the
He's
user
just
is
string.
string.
Yeah, my name's
String
Matt.
has
What?
5, 6,
Oh yeah, your time was number 30 was my time.
Okay, well, so let's pull the console. So right now in your HTML, look at regular HTML, right? So in here, you don't have that in the box. It will give you a line version. But if you go to your browser and you command option J, so if you write, that's fine, you just write it. Just go back to it. Oh, okay, it works.
And then they're out of the, with Creamy and they're right. I tweeted about
South Korea? Yes.
Supposed to do Chrome.
you know, like,
But they saw pizza, real pizza.
Like in your terminal.
It's amazing. Yeah, oh yeah. We've had like 3 or 4 times like buying it for 20 kids. Well, yeah.
I'll show you the gift later.
My son's been a
Then
change
it's like,
since first week of January.
they don't know
So now you can Alright, so this, so you put in your file, error is somewhere. It's telling you. All right, guys. I think we're about done with the break, so let's bring it back together. Thanks, Matthew. All right. So, does anyone have any last-minute questions about functions? There will be a lot more time to play around with them, but if anybody thought of anything, they don't. In fact, if you think so, that's going to be trouble for JavaScript in the future because they're pretty extensive. All right. So let's get into objects. So objects are very similar to arrays, as I said earlier. They're essentially a collection of information that you store in a given variable. They're different from arrays in that they're what we call an unordered list, not an ordered list. So as I said before, if you're calling some sort of array, you'd have array 1, right? And that would give us the first or second value? Second. Yes, thank you. Cool. I make that mistake a lot. But that would give you the second value within that array. So an object is very similar, but we have what we call key value pairs or properties. So the key is essentially the description of what that piece of information is. The value is, as it sounds, the value of what you're putting in there. So here you see we have this var car. This is our car object. So a car is essentially a collection of different bits of information that make this automobile. So our car is, oops. So if we write car here, so this is our object. So it's saying our object, our make is a Honda, the model is a Civic, and the year is 1997. So essentially when you are going to be calling something within an object, instead of doing array 1 or object 1, you would be doing object make or object model. There are a couple different ways that you can actually make those calls, and there are a lot of different ways where you can manipulate your objects. So before we get into that, the next sort of 35, 40 minutes or so is going to be all you do, and I'm just going to be going around answering questions. So for the first 5 minutes, turn to a partner, or if you have a table of 3, you guys can work in triples. On the board, or on the tables, I'll hand out markers. Try to just draw out literally an object on the table. Think about first what sort of attributes or what properties a student here in WDI would have. And then just draw out the object, just as I have here with car, except as your WDI student. Try to think of at least 5 different key value pairs to add in there. And as you see, we have a couple different bonuses, or a bonus, where your key value pair would include an array. So I'm going to go ahead and give one to you guys. You guys could all work together. What's up? Nope. You have to deal with it. How's it going here? Let's get started. That's how you want it. So that could be our array.
It seems similar. Instead of like the person who's very Oh, that's just the name of it. Yeah, like so basically
So the next one is going to be all you yourself. So you guys can edit if you want. You guys can edit
Quotation thing. So, right, because we're gonna put all one because
It could just be, because it don't matter, because like even with this, like this is to y'all, like we're just seeing
You guys have to set up
you want this to represent valid side. So we're seeing it's not a full list, that's not the same thing.
Yeah, because
So
it
you can alter it.
gets to it a little bit later,
Also,
but
like,
you build an array out of it.
yeah, I mean, we put whatever you want, we're just talking about
Maybe we both draw that. Draw your option, draw your option. All right, guys, let's bring it back together here. Does anybody have any questions right now about just sort of building out a basic object? I saw most things on the table looking pretty good. Thoughts, question?
Yes.
Yeah, what's up?
So, I mean, I think we have it, but we were trying to think like, what things would WDI students
Sure.
or
I mean, it's just whatever. So it's literally you can add in any attribute about a student. So name, gender, type of computer, or I don't know, different skill sets, things like that. Anything that would go into a general person. We use WDI student as an example, but it's wherever you want. So before we get into the next exercise, I just want to kind of recover this basic example here. I just saw a couple things here and there that I just want to point out. So one big thing, and I run to this issue all the time because it's a really easy typo, is make sure you have a comma after each key value pair except the last one. So between each key value pair, you need a comma. Key value pair, you need a comma here to let JavaScript know that this object is separated by different key value pairs. The last one you don't want a comma because then it will expect to see another key value pair below it, which you are not providing. The other big thing, which I think might mention in the next part of the udo, but I just saw it on the tables a couple times, is if you have a key value pair like street dash name, and then let's say main, right? So if this is your key value pair, when you're inputting this in JavaScript, unlike all the other keys, this actually has to be in quotes because of this dash. So if you're going to include a dash, you need to include quotes around that name, just as an FYI. Yeah?
There's that where we just dash, but it goes an underscore.
Is underscore would be fine. You don't need the quotes with the underscore. Yep.
So we recommend lower cases with underscore.
Yep, exactly. Yeah.
Well, an apostrophe, like you did, like Matthews, Max.
I don't think it would accept an apostrophe, actually. So it considers that as like a quote, basically. So it's adding in like an extra quotation mark. Yeah. So you wouldn't be able to do that. Yeah. All right. So the next section, if you guys want, we can run through this first, but I was thinking that you guys can sort of read through the next section, so it makes it a lot easier to kind of get a feel for it and practice. So individually, I would say read through how to create, read, update, and delete these objects and iterate, and then come back together with your pairs or your groups and apply that to your actual objects that you just built on your table. So put it in your console, open the console, build that object, and then apply each of these. So create that object. Then pull some stuff out of the object. Read something from the object. Then update your object. Add a new key value pair or update one of the key value pairs. Then delete something. So delete your student's name, which would be weird, but do it. And then iterate. So as I said before, if you guys have an array, iterate through the object and print out the different keys of that object. So basically, if you have a list for your car, if you have make, model, year, and you want to know, if somebody wants to know what keys are in that, if they're not actually seeing this variable, then try to iterate through and just print out each key. And then lastly, print out each of the values as well. So that would be a little something that you might have to Google to print out the actual value pairs instead of just the keys. But yeah, so I would say this will be about a half hour. Just go ahead and read through it slowly. Try to get an understanding for how to modify objects. And then go through the exercise with your partners. And then after that, I believe we will take a break. Or we're going to go through nested collections first. And then we'll take a break. So I'm going to put 30 minutes on the board. And I'm going to be around for questions. But feel free to take like 5-10 minutes to read through things, practice on your own, and then bring it together with your group. And if you guys get through all the UDO stuff quickly, I would suggest going back and trying to do this FizzBuzz bonus as well. But I would definitely take some time to work through this UDO individually and as with your groups, just because this is a pretty important concept. Objects are pretty pertinent to JavaScript, so. So if you guys would run through sort of the car examples, or run through the reading, you can start partnering up and going through the student stuff with your partners.
How do you call the how do you make the console print the variable like what's inside the variable, like to make sure that
Yeah, that's
Oh, gotcha. Use policy.
car object.
Using
Pull this line out. Yeah, so it's like, it lists the car, and it's and then it goes on to
Did you get it? Did you get it?
Yeah, so going
Yeah, it's cool. That was good. I need the exercise.
Where do I go then?
I mean, sorry, the land is very good.
So if you want to create like car has a model year.
I know, but I don't know why.
Gotcha. You can do that, but you still can't.
Sorry, but that's.
So you can't say.
Line 6 would be.
And then you can also log people to see
Yep, so you can call it your So this works is basically saying for it knows that it's just saying but it's just saying for G's and R's log. Yeah, so like for the key shots behind it are console log. Yeah, so you try that out. So if you do instead of flat in as, right? Why don't you just try to do
not yet, we have to put in the labels first.
So it's just telling it to look through the console or whatever.
Yeah, I know.
So it's similar to just sort of So you're looking at the outcomes, you might as well follow that. But
So we said that.
We have to update the.
So it has a great course.
That's only if you want to cross it.
they say to put at least 5.
Yeah, so like if you do,
Oh, it's gonna be that.
I just made some up. So I put student and I just put like great information.
It's because it's like that. But it should work for less.
Yeah, it should work with this time.
English. So this is only especially the student has a computer and pull that thing.
Yeah.
Do that, yeah. So
I miss our use of
That's where
that.
it's also
Well, that's because you
So
put
this
that.
is kind of like 4 high than that, right?
I try to write.
I think because, yeah, it's very much.
So
Like, it's like, something, so you just think that these are certain things. I think it's the way, I think it's the way you name it, or you could put a dash, like one of the same before, like you have 2 words, you could put a dash. You would have to put a dash.
So that's a
Each new object, you know, your new object.
whole match, and then you pass
You just happen to keep using the same
printed out.
over and over.
Yeah, I think that we literally this, and then I did this, stop push, and then you put.
Nope, so it's still the attributes of here you see is are, so that's still got and then
Well, it's working to whatever you vary.
you're in the same.
Because,
Yeah.
so it doesn't know.
that's
So
a
that
really
thing right
important thing
there
to
is
be able to
exactly,
tell.
it's not returning back into. Okay.
Matt,
No, that's fine. That actually makes sense.
Yep, so you can do it both ways. And so this will still say, put in that app here for everyone, put it in, and then log out. That makes sense there.
You see how we call
Yeah, you're right.
variables without all the brackets?
We're not worried about
That's
it.
what we're doing here, because this is gonna be great numbers.
It should work.
I mean, you have to call it some numbers out.
Yeah, right,
Still,
With this working
So we
stuff.
have to put in, yeah.
give it a try, see what happens.
I like that. Alright, see what happens. Good words to hear.
Might be for the 40.
Did you figure out how to do this?
You can copy this and that.
Oh, I'm just, someone was. Oh, you're right.
Hey, yeah, what's up?
So like for.
Because remember, all this is computation part.
Yep.
So this has to be in one.
Oh, yeah. That particular helpful syntax isn't useful with the only the simpler things. This is what you have to say.
Yeah, so we're in the world when this exercise part.
What that is, it's a placeholder. That's it.
Hopefully those we got first ready on it.
Every time I next key, the sun.
Something's happening.
Alright, something is better than nothing.
Yeah. So then you can go on. Just want to ask for like this.
They
They don't care.
but I would suggest they are. So lowercase is kind of
Yeah. That's not what it's
Bird is probably not what you want because I said you want some generic.
oh, what, so I think the capital bar will grow.
So this is, everybody's
They were undefined earlier.
Okay, so push is gonna be
I
so if you want to add everything to yep.
Yeah. Oh, maybe it's because it's that shape.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, you know what?
There you go.
I should put a bracket.
What's that song?
It's a native JavaScript thing, it's out.
Yeah, I mean, you're right. It's,
If you were just adding things, you're just updating them, it's just
that's fair.
like whatever.
So basically it's saying for whatever specific function object, if it knows that this is it just like
The brackets.
That is telling you that an object is it's more of like a flexibility. When you run into
So it should be
rails, you'll see that there are more
key into that.
Alright, that's what it means.
Yeah.
Oh, I got it.
For anything that you guys are doing, in fact, nothing that I'm working on now. That's so like speed is a big deal when you're working on bigger projects. So like Garnet is something that is not only that big, but there's still some things where you can see like noticeable lags, except now that you're but no, but for things that like you're gonna be building in class, it's not gonna be such a big project where like the speed is gonna change because you're putting it in the top. However, you are going to have very long JavaScript files or Java like scripts, right? And you have multiple scripts sometimes. So putting it all in one big script tag at the top of the file doesn't slow it down, but it's going to make it a lot less readable. So I would start the practice of using actual script file now, just because it doesn't hurt if it helps you. Yep, sure.
Object got keys.
For those of you that are done, the last 7 minutes, there's also another bonus where there's no solution to it, but it's write a function that returns your object. So this is something that you'll learn a little bit later on, but if you want to start Googling it now, you can. This uses something that we call this. So if you start Googling this and see how to use literally the word this, you might be able to start building out a function that actually returns your object. Again, this is something that you'll get into a lot later on down the line, but just if you want to get a little bit of a head start on it, you can. Oh, yeah, sorry. So I was thinking like, so you wrote out a function that you actually like input the,
I stepped and repeated that part, but like I created everything else.
So this will be. So the idea is later on.
This size didn't work, but
We'll have
so I was gonna have like 5 pages where I did it. So it'll be personal, professional, resume.
so the easy development model, right? And then
I was on my career.
not
Yeah. I guess I did. Yeah, well, so I had a whole bunch of things. I was trying to get to work and it didn't work. But I guess like I used that.
Oh yeah, yes.
So that's probably
Actually,
Then counting on
Here, this is where you say. So the idea is that anytime
that's what I designed.
It gives you like.
So it doesn't give you Did you look at the homework tonight?
So that's what.
you gotta ask them.
Oh. This function inside the bonus actions.
Yeah. So
Like, but this is great, since ATR is really, right now I have courses, so I want to find that course. The next time we'll do ATR as cohorts, see what I
I hate this Slack. It looks like it's constantly like.
so you're saying like you're creating.
No.
Yeah, so we have our function.
Yes.
No one messaged me.
would return an array of
So sorry, so you're saying like this just function.
Is this
This
function?
is pretty on there.
So it's this thing is no new code except for
Okay, so you're saying like functions are great. Oh, got it. So that stays. So once you clear, got it. I see. So sure, there's not. Create this.
Do you know
Something says.
so it's
Yeah. That's what it is.
The first one would be API, strength. The second one is
Can you throw these strings?
Are you using
this
the
function
array
is
for
array.
you're creating our
Yep, so it knows that that's like, this is saying, this is the piece, and this is the top. I didn't get set up.
Okay, use the GFS file, GS1.
Right, and it'll still return the class.
GIF, whatever.
Did you guys recommend, which one did you guys do? You guys use the object one or the 4 object? The last time. Yeah.
Yeah.
So this has some kind of red rules.
Exactly. I was trying to figure out what it was saying about this. So I added a variable.
Oh, sure, I'm gonna wipe this down.
Okay.
But then, so you the minor variable there or not?
Yeah, we really started talking about scope and global and all that kind of stuff. Yes, I didn't want to bring that into the case. It's gonna work either way. You just gotta decide who else can see that variable and see the value.
Okay. I was making sure I was like, wait, I don't understand, and then I put it in the
What's he doing?
All right.
Same way.
So, how do people feel about this stuff so far? I see one big thumbs up. I see some ifs, some kind of, some other thumbs up here and there. A little confused at first. Feeling a little bit better now, or still a little confused? Is there anything specific that people want to cover about that exercise? Did I hear a yes? This. So I'm actually not going to cover that right now, just because that was the bonus, and it will come up later on in class. Not this class, but another class. I would suggest just kind of Googling a little bit further. I only gave you guys a few minutes to look into it, but we're going to move on just because that part is a little bit of a long story. Yeah.
Could you dive into more about arrays within objects and like, so for example, when we created our WDI student, we wanted to do like location and then city and state, like
Yeah.
the proper way of writing it or.
Yeah, that's a great segue into my next part. This is twice you've done that to me today. I appreciate that. Yeah, well done. It's like you're reading past the lesson. No, I'm just kidding. Anyway, so that actually brings us to nested collections. So, funny enough, you can have nested collections or nested objects. So, for example, if we want to talk about our car, or we can use student as an example in a second, our car here has something like make, model, year. Then it also has gears, which we talked about. So this is an array of what gears the car has, right? But what if you want to have something like your engine? So this car has an engine here, but then within that, an engine also has key value pairs. So an engine has horsepower. An engine has pistons and fast and furious. I did not write that. But it exists apparently.
Is it fast and furious?
Let's go with yes. A Honda Civic, 1997, fast and furious, no doubt. But anyway, so this is what we would call a nested object, an object within an object. So, on that note, how do you guys think we would get, this is just going for arrays first, how do you think we would be able to call neutral here? So neutral is in our gears array. So I'm going to pull this up real quick. I'm going to create this. So what would I type here to pull up neutral? Yeah. Ooh. Who had one? I'm going to go over here just because I've called on you a couple times. Sorry. Yeah, go for it.
Cars, gears, brackets, one.
Oop. Did I do that wrong? Oh, car. Thank you. I was like, I know you said that right. Cool. All right, neutral. Awesome. So, what do people think we would do to get 6 horses? So this is within the engine key, within that object, to get 6 horses. You have a thought? No? Yeah. Let's give it a try. Car.engine.horsepower. That's not right. All right. Nice. All right, there we go. Sweet. Cool. Yeah, so that's exactly right. So coming back to your question about a student, it'd be the same thing. If you want to do a location, you could have, instead of engine, you would have location. And then you'd have city and state as 2 key pairs, or keys, within that nested object. Does that make sense? Cool. We're running a bit over, so I'm going to say let's go on a break real quick. Let's do a 10-minute break, or Are you guys cool if we do a 5-minute break? Is that blasphemous? All right, let's do a 5-minute break, and then we'll keep going. We'll power through. Did that answer your question? Okay. Yeah, I was gonna.
You're like, I need your brains for chocolate.
Yeah. So that would mean so you could do that, and that's fine. But if you wanted to then like call up the state or the like city and state, then you have to do location
He has the calculation
one
of
or
it.
location
Yeah,
zero.
there is,
Whereas if you do key value pair, you can do location state and location name. It's similar. It's similar. It's just easier way to
let me
organize
see if I
something
can
like this, given that they're not exactly the same piece of data. Does that make sense? Is that fair? Yeah. Oh, I totally lied to you guys. We can do a 10-minute break. I thought this was 4:45. Oops. I lied. We're doing a 10-minute break. Take it back. What is that? Let's say another 7 minutes. No, it's cool. I looked at the clock and I was like, oh, it's 4:45. I'm way behind. And then I realized it's only 4:15. Class is not yeah, I feel much better. Yeah. So I've got half an hour for like Twitter update and methods. Yeah, right. I'm sorry.
so the Twitter is the in-class project and the JavaScript is the homework.
Yeah, I'll change it on the scope and see.
Yeah.
I know that's wrong.
So that means
Yeah, of course.
Back to adventure.
What's up? I think it's in the back there. I think Ryan has it.
Tell me, is budget an actual measure right now? Did it get more revenue in it? How would you be able to see yourself? His budget is, did it convert 560.22 into 560? Right, it's the only way all this is going to work.
For a second it looked like a hat.
So I would think we could do something here. It's going to come back at $66.
It's changed now.
It just,
I just merged in a quick change on scope and sequence just to switch from
Oh.
mark assignment.
But I have
It was set as build for objects. Yeah, that's what calculator. So I had a pull up a server last week where I tried to tell you one. So I just merged it in really quick. So it's literally the same thing. So
One thing you can use me for that kind of stuff too, or
Yeah.
support in class, just say, oh, and we'll go look at it and do it.
Yeah,
If you're
for sure.
busy teaching or whatever.
cool, thanks. Yeah, I meant to do it earlier today and talk to Nick about it.
Standard.
Yeah. I figured
We fight hard to avoid it.
of all the things that could go wrong, that's at least a small thing that could go wrong. So I'm not too upset about it.
Do we have homework listed in the bottom of lessons? We do have it listed there.
Yep. So it's listed. It's still listed down here. Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's fair, just in case, like, just so I can announce at the end if they go through time.
Tonight I wanted to talk about where does screencast go? Because now we're talking about GAWBI lessons. And I put a screencast in.
Yeah.
GAWBI 8.
Yeah.
DC.
Yeah. Yeah. I never. I forgot to, or I had my screencast for my first lesson, but I never actually put it anywhere. So I have it still saved. So I need to figure out. I don't actually know what
I
it
just
is.
put it on YouTube.
Oh.
And I make them unlisted. And I think we have a hack tag for them.
Okay.
Make them unlisted and I put them in a GA playlist. So
Okay.
I share the link of the GA. Normally, what we've done in the past is we just have another page where all our screencasts are for each instructor.
Okay.
We don't necessarily say the screencast for this lesson is here. We just here's what screencasts are. You only find the ones you want.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I'll upload mine to YouTube. We can just figure out a place to send the links.
At one point in time, I put them in the lesson, but that stopped working. I think if we had 40 instructors and
Yeah.
lessons and everything else.
I kind of liked it as a student. I liked having it at the top of the lesson. But yeah, I think we just set it in. Might be something to discuss. Okay, cool.
I'm the one who'd be like, let's turn it on.
Oh, I'm gonna start stealing markers.
No, I don't touch it.
I'd be surprised if that's modern. It's data on that thing recent, and there's that kind of optimization.
Okay. I'm gonna say try to look into it a little bit more. So
That's
yeah,
not
I'm gonna say
like
look into it. Or just think about trying to creating a function.
Free clothes for the battery.
I don't know why I say this. That's what I was saying. Best friend to stay with.
Yeah. So.
No, I mean like you go out to
Sorry.
It's all shadow.
Okay. So we have one more exercise to do. This is still going through objects. This is no actual coding. This is just trying to understand what objects are still and just trying to go through the structure of an object. So we have this big old Twitter object. I've already forked and cloned it, but if you guys want to fork and clone, you can. So I'm going to pull it up real quick. That's not it. No. Oh, did I lose it? All right. Oh, no, I'm on it. Never mind. So I'm going to pull it up in Atom. So the idea of this exercise is to literally look at a very large object. What we would call, this is actually like a JSON response. So this is when you're making calls to an API. Come on. There we go. This is when you're making calls to an API, which you will get into a ways down the line. Oftentimes, you are returned this long object, right? So you see lots of key value pairs, arrays within arrays, and objects within objects. This is something that would come up when you're trying to look at some external data file. And then oftentimes, you'll then use that data to manipulate something on your browser. So this is just some practice to go through sort of reading an object like this. So in the index.html file, there are just some questions here. Just go through, try to answer the questions. We can go through a couple together afterwards. I'll go through the first one now. So does this tweet have any favorites? So what you can do is you can literally just kind of scroll through and look at the different key names. So you'll see the second one right here is favorited. So that says false. So does it have any favorites? Probably not. But just to be safe, let's look up favorite. So we find that, and it's that. So now it's saying favorited is false. So the answer to the first one would be no, it does not have any favorites. Simple as that. So let's just take like 10 minutes now just to run through it, try to answer some questions, and then we'll go through them when you guys are ready. Any questions on that? I will Slack out the link to the exercise real quick for those of you that don't have the lesson plan open. Oh, it's just console logs. So it's just if they want to run it. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
I
Like
was
if they
wondering where the answers are supposed to go down.
Yeah, I just have it writing in the HTML file. It's just however they want. Yeah. It's just if they want to open it up, then it'll just run everything in the yeah. So do we have I thought install this installed Node.
I don't remember anymore. Too many changes.
Yeah, I was not really involved with it, so I'm not sure. But I mean, I've just been saying like use the console or like a REPL.
Yeah, this is just a bigger one that would work well for me.
That's fair. That's a good point. Yeah. For next time, it's good note.
When is created? Wait, what?
Oh.
So it's like, wait, what? Copy, obviously.
Sorry about that. Appreciate it. There's no key that's called is. It's a pretty intense. Yeah. Yeah.
Maybe a lot more than that.
Yeah.
I've looked up the tweets.
Yeah. What if that's changed?
Reply to user IDs. Look at this stuff. Get it to the bottom line. 32.
You can reply to user IDs.
So you know what the ID string is of the user that you're replying to, I guess.
Somebody did pseudocode.
Yeah. The pseudocode that accidentally got put into code.
And these are the user ID strings of the contributors.
Except they're not strings now.
I
Yeah.
know. They are doing life for those up there too, huh?
It's weird. Oh. That's why I don't work at Twitter. Next Twitter. So that's what we call method, and that would be actual updates. Sorry. Yep. That's right. So yeah, I'm sorry. So this applies to right? So by calling outside this pair, that is yeah, yeah. So it's all right. So the other thing is instead of update, so the browser that's outside of the but instead of updating, it's like create student. And so then your student name part of the student equals create student and then just pass it. So it goes below everything, right? So if you are create student equals function, and then you have that same function. So our create student equals function, and you use
My question is to intently.
from there. Yeah. So it is now creating the student based on this. So if you do that, right? So this is setting create student. Yep, so you don't return. So then you can say or Ryan equals create student, and then pass in your age and height, and then create a Ryan object. Does that make sense?
So you're saying,
So instead of having like a generic element student, you can have our Ryan equals create student. Yeah.
okay.
Yeah.
Totally.
Got it. Yeah, sorry, that's that's what I was going for. Yeah, so we're going to cover this in 5 minutes, but first we're going to cover this dot stuff. We're going to cover methods. Yeah, this is all we're getting at. So the idea of that is that now you can use that function to build 17 students. So all your students are different names. So you can make car Ryan, just create a student car Joe. That's right. I can go back to that. Cool. Okay, so let's kind of go through a couple of these. I don't really want to go through all of them just because there are a bunch. Does anyone have any specific questions on any of them? Yeah. The URL. Yeah. So I'm going to note that this is like a pretty confusing object, and there are right answers, but this will have a couple areas. So I'm sure part of the confusion is that there were 2 spots where you could see URLs. Is that fair? So yeah, so here you have on the top, you got URLs, and then within that array, you've got expanded URL, URL, and display URL. And then if you scroll down, there's another one here that also has expanded URL, URL, and then this description and URLs here. So in theory, the answer that we were going for is just this one. So it's this first URL section. Either way, for this case, this is sort of an example of like a bit of a rough object because there are a lot of the same key names. So it's going to be a little bit confusing here. But essentially the answer for that would be 3. It would be your display URL, your URL, and then your expanded URL. Any other questions there? I know that's a little bit confusing still. But unfortunately, a lot of times when you run into JSON objects, it's going to look a little bit daunting like this. I know my first foray into it I spent a long time trying to figure it out. So, any questions about other ones? Yeah.
So this is an API from Twitter, right? So meaning you can embed this into a page?
Yep. So the idea, and you guys will kind of come across this tomorrow or Friday when we get into what we call DOM manipulation. So, but the idea is that you can use this data and you can actually put it onto the browser. So you can take this from this, you can take data from this object, bless you, take data from this object, add it into a variable that then gets essentially spit out onto your browser. I'm not going to go too in depth on it because you will go into it in class on Friday, but not API specifically, but just how to manipulate the DOM and like which is your browser. But yes, long story short, you can use this data to either spit out numbers on the page or manipulate something within your page. Yeah. Did I see you have a question over here?
Yeah, the last one, how many tweets do they have? Just curious as to.
Yeah. Let's see. I think we decided that was listed count. Yeah. I mean, you know, I talk to the people on Twitter all the time, so it's fine. No, I'm just kidding. We decided that was listed count. So that's like the number of tweets that this Twitter tweet handle.
Status is counting.
Yeah, that's what we, because we thought it was might have been status discount, because then you can be part of the Twitter list.
I don't really know Twitter well enough to know the answer to that, but maybe I'm too old for this, but yeah.
If you read through the Twitter API documentation, it
Love
says
it.
status is not.
Love it. So we're gonna go with Melissa's answer. Actually doing research before you create an exercise. That would be an important thing to do. I like that idea. I'll make sure to make that change for the next class. Anyway, cool. Thanks. I appreciate that. That's good to know. Status is count. Yeah. Yeah.
For the do you follow that? Is that the follow request sent false things?
Yeah. That's what I decided, but we're gonna go with it. So yeah. Cool. All right. So, sorry, Rob, do you have a question?
Oh, no, I was going to say, it does say following and then true. Sorry. Right there. Your mouse is right on.
Oh yeah, following true. What was the one that you?
There's like follow request.
Follow request sent false.
Yeah, you can send them a friend request.
Oh, I think it probably changes to false. It probably changes to false once it gets accepted, I'm guessing. Yeah. Yep. Good question. Good catch. Thanks, Rob. All right. So last thing we're going to get into is methods. So methods are, put very simply, they are functions within objects. So what we usually have here, again, is our key value pair. So our make model, or our make is Honda, our model is Civic, our color is red. But you can also add in a key where its value is a function. So, for example, our car. When you say car.drive, what you're saying is the car goes vroom vroom, right? So you're actually telling it to then apply a function on that object. You could include an object that actually updates, you can include a method that actually updates that object. So we have here car.paint. That would return a function where you actually input a new color and it would change the color of your car. So let's run through it real quick. So we've run our function here. So now if we say car.drive, and you'll see here, we still include these open and closed parentheses. So car.drive or drive is a key from that method or from the object, right? But because it's a function and we want to use that function, call it now, we still have to include the parentheses here. So if we do car.drive, we'll console log our vroom vroom. If we do car.paint blue, so now it's the same thing. We're running a function here, right, or our method, car.paint, and we're inputting blue as our argument. So now our car has been painted blue. So if we decide to just do car.color now, what do we think it's going to give us? Yep. So it's going to be blue. So car.paint, you'll see here, it has actually changed car.color to new color. So originally we had it as red. And then when we run this method, it now changes car.color to new color, which in this case we inputted as blue. Does that make sense to anyone? Or everyone? Anyone? So yeah, so long story short, objects are really useful to our kind of JavaScript programming, and methods especially are useful. You get into object-oriented programming, or sort of like what we call OJS here, next week, I think. No, next week's project week. So the week after, maybe? I don't know what the calendar looks like. Sometime soon. And you'll understand sort of why, once we get into like prototypes and constructor function, you'll see why objects are so important to JavaScript. So does anyone have any questions, last minute questions on methods before we just kind of close up?
What are some other, sorry,
Sure.
what are some other types of methods that you use besides just with functions?
So a method is a function. So the idea of so it's basically another name for a function, but the idea of it is that it's a function that's within an object. So a method is, the idea of a method is it's this key function pair, essentially. So like it would still be called a key value pair, but the value in this case is a function. And so that combination is just called a method in our sense. Yeah. Good question. All right, so on that note, let's just go through some last minute questions. So just from somebody, instead of calling it out, does a function need an input, output, and side effect to work? Yeah. No? What is it? What always gets, or what is sort of like something that you always need from a function? Out of those three, what happens every time?
Output.
Yes. Yep, so it's an output. So you don't always need an input, right? So you don't always need to actually have arguments in your function. You don't always need a side effect, so you don't always need something like a console log. But as we showed before, anytime you run a function, you'll always get this undefined, which still actually counts as an output. So JavaScript will say, even if you don't implicitly return something and you say return num1 times num2, if you don't say that, it'll still return this undefined for you. That's just because JavaScript there needs to be some sort of output to actually define a function. So what's the difference between calling and referencing a function? This goes back to towards the beginning. So then what's calling a function? How do we call a function? Yeah, Mohammed.
Function name and then the parentheses.
Yeah, exactly. So what would that do?
It would run the function.
Yep, exactly. So what about referencing a function? Yes, yeah, sorry.
Is referencing a function when you later want to perform the action that's part of the function? Like calling is when you create it, and then referencing is when you actually use it.
So it's sort of the opposite. So calling a function is when you want to run it. So that's when you include like multiply. If you have multiply, you have multiply 2, 4. So that would be calling your function. So this is going to return 8. That's how that works. Referencing it would be just having multiply. So that would be referencing it. So this is saying, this would be if you want to pass it into another function. So let's say you have like I don't have a very good example for using multiply, but basically if you want to call a function within another function, you can pass this in without calling it right away. Does that make sense? Cool.
So what's referencing a function?
So referencing a function would be, sorry if I was blocking, it's this without the parentheses. So it's basically saying we've already defined it, but now we're referencing that function, let's say in a different function's argument, right? So if you want to use that multiply function within a different function, you can reference it within the arguments. So if you had, I don't have a very good example for this, but if you had like calculator, right? That takes a couple arguments. So you can reference multiply here, right? And then the calculator, you can then call multiply here. Like 2, 4. Yeah.
So what would the difference be if you just had calculator and then open it without having to put the multiply in the parentheses up top where you're
Sorry, is that one more
Would
time?
that have, I mean, basically,
Without having parentheses here?
if you didn't have that there at all, you just called up that function at the bottom, would that not give you a, would that still not be considered calling up that other function within this function?
You could do that as well. So again, this is a bad example. Unfortunately, I don't have a very good one off the top of my head, but you could do that. There are other cases where. So I think for your rock paper scissors project or pre-work, I think there was a time where you had to like the play to 5 step. I think in play to 5 you passed in the like get winner function into that play to 5. Is that right? I don't really remember it very well, but I'm pretty sure you do that. And so that's referencing that function. Then you call like the get winner within the play to 5 function. Yeah, I think that's how it worked. I don't really remember very well, but yeah, sorry I don't have a better example. But there will be times where you want to reference a function and then pass through additional variables in that function once you've referenced it. So how about expressions and declarations? I know that one was a bit of a tricky one before. So what's an expression for a variable or for a function? So that's good. Yeah. Yes, exactly. So how would we set that up, just really quickly?
So I guess with multiply, you do variable multiply equals function.
Yeah, exactly right. Yep. How about declarations? Yep. So just the other way around. So which one gets hoisted? Declarations. Yep. Exactly. Cool. All right. So this is sort of not a trick question. This is a question that has a few answers. But how are objects like dictionaries? So if you think of a dictionary, how would that be similar to an object? Or how could you write an object from a dictionary? Yeah.
Very word in the definitions as their keys.
Yeah, or as their
Attributes.
or values.
So
Yeah, exactly. Yep. So like your dictionary would be the actual object name, right? So you do var dictionary, and then each word would be keys, and then definitions would be values. Exactly. Yeah. And then lastly, the difference between a property and a method. Sort of a quick question. Any thoughts? Yeah.
Property is an attribute of an object. A method is a function of an object.
Yes. Yep. Exactly right. Yep. Cool. Does anyone have any final questions? We're pretty much towards the end of the day. I'm sure people are antsy to leave. Anything else? How do people feel about objects and functions? You'll have a lot of practice with these, I can assure you. So on that note then, your homework tonight, if you looked at the scope and sequence earlier today, it said big old Twitter object. That was wrong. I apologize. Your homework tonight is JavaScript calculator. That is now fixed on the scope and sequence as well. If you guys want to get a head start on it now, you can for the next 10 minutes. Feel free. We also included a bunch of different resources at the bottom. So I think before or during Squad Scrum last week, we talked about Eloquent JavaScript. So I definitely recommend looking into that. You can look at objects. They have an objects chapter and a functions chapter and probably 7 more on top of those. But also look through some of these as well if you want. These CoderByte challenges, so those are just code challenges. I think you have to like create a user profile to use all of them, but there are like a few towards the beginning that you can play around with. They can be pretty hard, so if you're feeling like a challenge, I definitely recommend looking into it. Yeah, if no one has any questions, feel free to get started on the homework, and I'll stick around for 11 minutes or so and answer any questions.
Who's office hours today?
Who has it?
Does anyone have office?
Yeah, I think,
Robin and Matt.
yeah, Robin and Matt.
Cool. 6 to 8.
So what does it say that
Oh, I know. Yeah. So this is not something you would be expecting to know. It's something that I left out. This is expression. This is awesome. You need to do equals new creates.
because that's telling you
It's
create
creating
an object.
So type in new in this case. That's good. That's a tough one. Forgot about that stuff.
So by default, it's not returning an object, it's returning an object that's undefined. Whereas if you say new, it's going to
You understand? Yeah, exactly. Yep.
Yes, call it a constructor function. The
Yeah.
function is designed to construct instances of objects.
and we're going to do that when we get into classes.
Yep.
Thanks.
Is that a question? No. It's up to you. You can do that, but it still won't. You will still be running one of those at a time, right? So if you calculator.add AB, or calculator.add like 2, 4, it's only going to give you the addition 2 and 4, right? So, but you can name the arguments and stuff like that. A, it won't be an error. So if you're doing calc.add, you can pass in two numbers, and then calc.subtract 2 numbers, and it'll give you the correct answer. Yeah. Sure. What's up? Yeah. 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 Yeah, so this is the idea of like declarations and expressions, right? So this is your expression. You have a bar here as well. So this is basically setting this function as a variable. This here is just declaring the function. So you can do it both ways. It's sort of up to you. The idea though is that this one is hoisted up to the top of your JavaScript. So wherever you put it in your file, it's still gonna like exist as soon as you run your JavaScript file. Whereas this one only exists when it gets to the word bar in your JavaScript. Does that make sense? Sure. Yeah, so that's it. Okay, cool. Yeah.
Because I was looking at like,
Yeah, sure.
ES6.
Oh, yeah.
Like, yeah, there's something about like, I don't know, like I had a question about something like scope. The context of like where you put your functions is different or something.
Yeah. Well, I don't know ES6 yet. I haven't really looked into it too much, but the idea of scope here is that scope is essentially a little bit. The idea of scope is when can you use something, right? So if you have a function and you set like a variable within this function, you can't use that outside, right? You can't call that variable outside unless you return it explicitly. So here it's sort of similar. So this the scope of this is going to be that the higher JavaScript function. The scope of the other function you write bar my function is essentially everything below that. So you can use it anytime you've already expressed that function. But this one, if you declare it, you can use it on your function. So that's sort of like a weird way to describe scope, but it's similar.
This method would just student though, right?
Oh,
It's kind of painful.
I'm sorry. So you're saying an object. Got it.
Like I can put a method inside of
Yeah. So this is the only way you can do it. So you actually can't say in an object, I don't think you can say like the key is light and then the value is like bar function. I don't think
Like
you
there,
can.
You can have the expression or the declaration.
Yeah, once you've done the get context, when you get the,
Inside an object, you
that,
can only use
that
that.
direction JS calculator and below,
Yeah, sorry.
all references back to
So inside your object.
That's where it might be.
Because basically,
In that direction.
yeah.
You go to a different.
No, it's cool.
You go to Twitter.
Outside of
There,
our
you can
object.
register.
Yeah. So, does that help you?
You sound a virus.
Just use JS or use CSS and HTML.
No, so we know CSS and HTML. This is all basic. This is all
This is
common.
just
Yep. So you guys will learn how to like implement everything onto your browser. I think on Friday you guys got English. So yeah.
Or at least.
I think it's out loud.
Yeah.